That one is a Mike Dodd. I've got a couple of plates here of John Leach's. This is the one he calls his supper plate that he makes most of.
Who did you say that one was?
John Leach.
And
these are again, the design comes a lot from the way that they are fired, because he fires these in a stack 4 plates high. So it's got this wide rim, so you can sit them together. It's got a turned foot, so the one above sits on the top pair sit on the foot of the bottom pair. And he biscuit fires. But it works very well both as this technical form, but also as a visual form. Those ones are just thrown, and then he has turned off excess clay on them. Again, though he doesn't raw glaze, try as I might to, because I think the kind of pots they make are much really ideal for raw glazing, but I failed to persuade him over the years, because with something like this, a plate you're only glazing on one side, so you can think of it as a sheet of clay that's only glazed on one side. So the glaze is absorbed on one side, this expands, you have one side that doesn't. That's kind of not a good idea really for raw glazing. But because these have got quite chunky rims, that holds the form together when you raw glaze. Okay. That's Jeremy Stewart, who Ben was with a few days ago doing a workshop. That is raw glazed. He does raw glaze. This is Jonathan Garrett, who makes earthenware, has pottery near Shaftesbury. They're raw glazed and wood fired. And again, this idea with a plate of, I've been talking about people making bowls having narrower bases for numerous reasons. The same applies with plates. Obviously, if you're glazing that, the less you've got of a surface that's unglazed, the better that's going to work in terms of raw glazing. Then we have here, that's Byrne, thank you. Clive Byrne, that made that for our youngest daughter. I keep thinking there's the dates wrong on it. This is Walter Seltzer, who was a student of mine many years ago. He has a pottery in southern Germany. Raw glazed. He virtually just uses this one type of glaze. It's a Chino glaze, but there's, I think, 3 different types of Chino glaze on that one plate. It's kind of a smooth clay, and he uses a very thin coat of glaze, which again works well with raw glazing because you're not getting the pots wet. And again, the foot is fairly narrow for the whole plate. You've got a lot of plate hanging over there. This is what is catchy with an unpronounceable Russian surname. He was a Russian student who was here for over 2 summers. And again, that's this idea that you're making kind of really a shallow bowl. So many people tend to think of plates, and they're thinking of the industrial jiggered and jollied plate rather than a thrown plate. And I guess the last couple of years, looking at various food magazines and Genius and what have you, there seemed to be a lot more, kind of proper handmade plates being used with all the illustrations, and that's been really good. And seeing the variation of types that are available there. So again, it's a very even cross section. It's got that very thickened rim, which works very well with the raw glazing. And I think we fired some of these as pairs. there was enough space here for that for them to sit on them, and they weren't too narrow. If you had a very flat plate, particularly with our clay, and you put them together, it's likely that the base would sag on the one above. Again, John Leach's clay is a bit more refractory than ours, so it will stand things standing one on top of the other. This is a lady, Molly something, who's a potter on the Isle of Wight. I'll ask Jenny for that. And that's been thrown, but then she has turned off quite a lot. So she's thrown it out, but has left clay to sort of support that rim. And it's thrown, and then she's turned the clay away from there. I don't think she used laces. And that is, let's have to look at the David Winkley, who's at Velo near, just on the edge of Exmoor. Again, biscuit fard, again with a fairly narrow foot on it. Then I've got a couple of porcelain pieces here. This is John Reeve, a Canadian potter who worked at Ridge Pottery and then set up a pottery at can't remember the name of the village, up on Dartmoor. And so this is porcelain, so he's had to leave that bit in the middle. Had that not been there, the fact that porcelain is so pyroplastic at the top temperature, that would have sagged and sat on the shelf. So you leave that little pedestal bit for it to sit on. And then this is Chinese porcelain, I don't know what age at all. And again you can see that the foot ring is sort of halfway between the middle and the rim. Again, that would have been raw glazed. Often you find with Chinese porcelain, they would turn the outside of the foot, leave the foot solid, glaze it, then put it back on the wheel, turn out the inside of the foot, and just brush glaze in on that.
Why?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, when you've got a solid bit, you've got something much stronger that you can hold on to when you're doing the glazing. The pot is then, they turn with it, the porcelain almost dry. So the pot is in quite a strong state when they do the turning, and then they can brush the glazing. On a lot of them it's quite obvious that the glaze is brushed in. On this one it isn't, so I may be wrong about that. This one may have been turned and the whole thing glazed. And it was interesting, when I worked for Gwyn Hansen in France in the autumn of '67, she was building this pottery in France, and we got a lot of the material for particularly the kiln building, but for other use in pottery, from a factory in Vierzon, one of those big porcelain factories that had closed down, and we were just raiding it with saggers and bricks and pot balls. And their porcelain was once fired. I think then they must have been spraying glaze on, but quite a lot of commercial stuff that was proposed. They would heat the pots up, so they were really very hot, almost too hot to touch, and then dip them in the glaze. And the fact that they were so hot, they kind of drove the water out of the glaze rather than the pots collapsing. I've never done it that way, but that's good. And again, another Chinese pot, again with the foot ring pretty much halfway between the two. And that's much more the form of early plates. I couldn't find anywhere. I have got a plate, though it's much more like this in a dish form, from central France, somewhere I got this one which came out of that kiln that I actually saw firing. And it's again very much more of this sort of form rather than the kind of flat plate that we think of, which, as I say, really comes about because of the action of mechanising the production of various things.
So sorry, you're saying that that's like the original plate, that shape?
Yes, yeah. That's it's certainly in the Far East. That was much more so. You know, I had until it was stolen from me a porringer, which were the apparently sort of the main things that the Cognac potters ate out of, and it's really kind of like a large flat mug with a handle on it, so you could serve soup in it, you could serve other things in it, you could use it for drinking. I don't really know the origin of the word porringer. I should look that.
How do you know it was stolen?
How did I know it was stolen? Oh,
No, stolen.
Oh, because there was somebody usually asked if they could borrow it to draw it, and they never got it back.
Oh.
Oh.